ability to see that, we saw in the opioid crisis of just a few years before that doctors were being persuaded to prescribe opioids that they knew would be addictive and dangerous to an alarming degree.
And
so that's the modality.
They knew people were going to die. They knew it. They had a number. They knew it. There's like a certain percentage of these people are going to die. So let's keep doing it. Let's keep selling it, and let's profit off these people dying. Let's profit off these people's despair, because we have a product, and that product is going to make us a lot of money. And that's what they did. And that's what they've done with everything. And, you could get real cynical, but I think that's what they've always done. I think that's what they did with Vioxx. That's what they did with the opiate crisis. I think that's what they did with many, many different ways where they could justify making enormous amounts of profit at the expense of a bunch of people dying.
I've heard a few things about systems that help me to understand why such a thing might be possible. I heard one time that the CIA, no one person knows what's going on. Like, it's so diffuse. There are so many operations, so many things running concurrently that there isn't a person like the head of the CIA that you can go to and say, well, what's going on? It's too diffuse. I also heard a person like Yanis Varoufakis. He was like one of the leaders of Syriza when, after 2008, Greece had some wacky moment where they elected an extremist party, left-wing extremist party actually, that considered extreme, that said, we're not paying back all of that banking debt. We're not going to pay it back. And the people, of course, of Greece voted for them. And then the EU called in that government once they won the election and said, you fucking well are paying back that money. You can't make that decision. You don't have that authority. And this guy, Yanis Varoufakis, who's like a left-wing politician, said that he realised that the person at the EU that he was talking to didn't have any power. They only have the power that role affords them. The system is essentially functioning on its own. There is no individual that can go, oh yeah, all right, then don't pay back the money. There is no person that can tell you exactly what the CIA is doing. So it's like a sort of a set of coordinates which behind it has an energy that's pushing towards a particular agenda, the kind of ones that all of us can identify, financial agenda, dominion, those kind of identifiable agenda. But the system is self-sustaining, self-maintaining. The system excludes the possibility for disruption. It's almost like it already functions how an algorithm would function. It doesn't afford radicalism. It doesn't afford the intervention of democracy. When people's will is expressed, the will is delegitimized. When there is a sort of a popular uprising, then the uprising itself is discredited. 20, 30 years ago, it would have been the left in Latin America, Central America, like the deposing and destabilizing nations there. Now it's like even domestically, like figures like from the presumed right, like Trump, are discredited. And again, like I've got, just to clarify, of course, it's not someone that I would ally myself with enormously. But what I'm saying is that the system has clearly become more allied with a particular aspect of the establishment. Let's call it the liberal establishment, although it feels to me that it can function perfectly well regardless of which political parties in there.
I think it's interchangeable. I mean, it was during the Bush administration, it was the right. During the Bush administration, all the fears about election tampering were about the right. There was an HBO documentary called Hacking Democracy, and it was all about the Bush administration stealing the vote. And it was all about the Diebold voting machines. And they had shown in this documentary that there was a third-party access. So instead of just like you vote and I count your vote, there was actually the room for a third party to put information in that would manipulate the number. And they showed it, and they demonstrated it on the show, and everybody was terrified. Oh, my God, the Republicans are stealing the vote. And now it's like Katie Hobbs and, Carrie Lake in Arizona. It's like the Democrats are stealing the vote, and they're all the mail-in ballots. The Democrats are rigging the vote. Like, it's a puppet show. It's the old Bill Hicks joke. It's like, I believe in the puppet on the left. Well, the puppet on the right is more to my liking. Like, hey, there's one guy holding both puppets. Like, that's the old Bill Hicks joke, and that's kind of what the fuck is going on. And we get caught up in these ideological battles, and all the while they're inching us closer to nuclear war. They're pushing dangerous pharmaceutical drugs into our lives. They're instituting a centralized digital currency and a credit score system and controlling people and locking people down and establishing narratives that are not based on fact at all. But if you don't follow lockstep with that narrative, you're fucked and you're out of a job. And so everybody doesn't know what to do. Next thing you know, we have something that's very similar to what's going on in China. And that can happen. We're not that far away from something like that happening here. All it would take is a large disaster, some sort of an attack, some sort of a terrible scenario where a bunch of people died and they had to change the rules in order to protect us. And next thing you know, you're fucked.
Yeah, like 9/11 led to surveillance.
Yes.
The pandemic led to compliance.
Yes.
And one of those tropes of the kind of avowed conspiracy theorist that we mentioned earlier was that crisis is used to induce measures that they
Yes.
want to induce anyway. And one of the things that was spoken about in the pandemic was, oh, look, they had this agenda anyway. They were looking to
Yes.
introduce this kind of technology.
They just took advantage of a situation. I don't go as far as saying that I think that people orchestrate these things. I don't think anybody orchestrated the pandemic. I think the pandemic came out of that Wuhan lab. I think they fucked up. There's clear evidence that in 2018 they already have safety violations. It wasn't well done. The people in the lab got sick. They know who the people were that got sick. They know one of the spouses of one of the people that worked in the lab died from something that seems very similar to COVID. They know the history. They know what happened. But the way they took advantage of that situation reminds me of the way they took advantage of 9/11.
Yeah.
Because I don't think they orchestrated 9/11 either. I could be wrong on both casts. I want to be really clear about that. I don't know how things work. But I don't believe in these grand orchestrated conspiracies as much as I believe in people taking advantage of an opportunity in a moment, and that there's a very clear pattern of them doing that forever.
Yeah. Opportunistic seems easier to explain, and it is also in alignment with the way that we understand that model, that it
Yeah.
exploits opportunity to advance itself. I feel like that the credibility took its biggest hit in 2008 when the banks were bailed out, when ordinary people suffered at a point when it was clear that the economic model couldn't function anymore and needed radical revision,
Yeah.
and it was kept alive. And like these, and what happened, I feel like, is that the liberal establishment ceded that territory and meant that now the only anti-establishment rhetoric is coming out of Breitbart and Bannon and Trump, and like, they're the only people that are attacking the establishment and the authoritarianism that's coming out there and the exploitation. There's no voices, and the voices on the left have become kind of muted. It feels to me that during the 2016 election that they would rather have Trump win than have the Democrats win under Bernie Sanders. They made a bunch of like odd decisions that shows you that, yeah, that Hicks's metaphor stays ultimately true. And in a way, doesn't it make sense that if you want to maintain that, the number one thing you have to prevent is a broad alliance and a willingness of people to accept their differences. As long as you've got people willing to kill each other, whether it's online or in person, over cultural values,
Yes.
rather than accept, I'm willing to accept that that's how you live, as long as you accept that's how I
Exactly.
live, then it's over.
As
The war's
long as
over.
you can keep people at each other's throats, then you can continue to manipulate them. Then it's an easy chess game.